AITA for taking back my expensive gift after my brother re-gifted it to his girlfriend? I've always found joy in giving. There's something about watching someone's face light up when they receive a gift they weren't expecting, something they've wanted, but didn't think they'd get. For me, gift giving isn't just about the item itself, it's about the thought, the planning, the saving. It's the anticipation of seeing that spark of happiness when someone opens a gift and realizes just how much care went into picking it out. That's why I've always prided myself on being the thoughtful one in my family. I don't give gifts just for the sake of it. I put in the time to figure out what people want, what will really surprise them. And yeah, sometimes it's expensive. But for me, the look on someone's face when they realize how much effort I've put in is worth every penny. That's exactly how I felt when I bought my brother Jason his birthday gift this year. He'd been talking about this watch for months, dropping hints without really asking. Probably because he knew it wasn't something he'd buy for himself. It was a Tissot PRX with a blue dial. Sleek and classy. The kind of watch that stands out without trying too hard. The kind of watch that says, "I've made it." He had shown me pictures online. Commented on ads for it when we were hanging out. "Man, I'd love to get one of these someday," he'd say casually, but I could tell he wanted it. I saw the way his eyes lingered on the screen. The way he'd check the price and quickly scroll past, pretending it wasn't something he was seriously thinking about. I could tell this watch was something that mattered to him, even if he wouldn't admit it. So, I made a plan. I started setting aside money from each paycheck, slowly building up enough to buy it. It wasn't cheap, $725 to be exact, but it felt worth it. This wasn't just a gift, it was a way of showing Jason that I paid attention to what he cared about. That I wanted to give him something meaningful. The day of his birthday, I was excited, genuinely excited. I had wrapped the watch in a small, elegant box, not saying much about it when I handed it to him. I wanted the surprise to hit him all at once. When he opened it, his eyes widened, and for a second, I saw that flicker of joy. That moment when he realized what it was. "Dude, this is awesome," he said, looking up at me, clearly surprised. He turned the watch over in his hands, admiring the way the light caught the blue dial, the weight of it in his palm. I've wanted one of these for so long. I felt a rush of pride. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the payoff for all the time I had spent saving, planning, and choosing the perfect gift. Seeing his reaction made it all worth it. For the rest of the day, he wore the watch, showing it off to anyone who would listen. It felt like I had nailed it. Like I had given him something he'd treasure for years to come. Jason and I have always been close. Growing up, we were the kind of brothers who did everything together. As we got older, life started to pull us in different directions, careers, relationships, all the usual stuff, but we stayed connected. That's why this gift felt like more than just a watch. It was a way of showing him that even though we didn't see each other as much as we used to, I still knew what made him happy. I still cared about making him feel seen and appreciated. That night, as we all sat around after the birthday festivities, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I had done something good. Something that mattered. I imagined Jason wearing the watch for years, thinking of me whenever he glanced at it on his wrist. Maybe even telling people, "Yeah, my brother got this for me." It was one of those rare moments where everything felt right. Like I had gotten something perfect. For a few weeks after his birthday, I thought about the watch often, picturing Jason wearing it to work. Maybe out on the weekends with friends. I knew how much he had wanted it, and I was sure he'd be showing it off every chance he got. Giving thoughtful gifts like that made me feel connected to the people I cared about. It was my way of staying close, even when life got busy. But then, things started to shift. The next time I saw Jason, I noticed something strange. He wasn't wearing the watch. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was just keeping it for special occasions. Or maybe he didn't want to risk damaging it at work. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. After all, this was the watch he had been talking about for months. The one I had saved up for and surprised him with. Why wasn't he wearing it? I didn't want to be the kind of person who makes a big deal about these things. But I couldn't help feeling a little disappointed. The gift had meant a lot to me. And I had assumed it meant something to him too. So why wasn't it on his wrist? I tried to ignore it, telling myself that I was overreacting. Maybe there was a perfectly good reason he wasn't wearing it. Maybe I was putting too much pressure on him to love the gift the way I thought he should. After all, once you give a gift, it's not really yours anymore. That's what people always say, right? Still, something didn't feel right, and soon enough, I'd find out why. It didn't take long for the unease to settle in. As the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I saw Jason, I made a point to look at his wrist, hoping to see the watch I'd given him. But each time, it wasn't there. Instead, he wore his old watch. The one that looked worn and cheap compared to the sleek Tissot I had surprised him with. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. People have their reasons for not wearing something every day, right? Still, it nagged at me. That watch wasn't just an expensive gift, it was something personal. Something I had carefully chosen because I knew how much he had wanted it. And seeing him not wearing it felt like a small punch in the gut. Like he didn't appreciate the thought and effort that went into it. I tried to brush it off, telling myself not to make a big deal out of something that, in the grand scheme of things, probably didn't matter that much. But then one afternoon, I finally decided to ask him about it. We were hanging out at his apartment, playing video games like we used to when we were younger. I had been holding it in for weeks. But the curiosity, and, if I'm honest, the growing frustration, got the better of me. Hey, by the way, I started, trying to sound casual. I haven't seen you wearing the watch I got you. Everything all right with it? Jason paused the game and looked at me, an awkward expression creeping across his face. It was subtle at first, but I could tell immediately that something was up. He shifted uncomfortably, like he wasn't sure how to explain what had happened. That's when I knew this wasn't just about him not wearing the watch. Something more was going on. Oh, yeah, about that, he said, scratching the back of his neck. I kind of gave it to Sarah. I blinked, not quite sure I'd heard him right. Wait, what? Yeah, she really liked it. You know how she's into watches and stuff. She thought it was cool. And well, she liked it more than I did. So I let her have it. I stared at him, my mind racing to process what he had just said. He gave it to his girlfriend? The watch that I had spent months saving for. That I had picked out specifically because he had wanted it for himself. He just gave it away? My heart sank. It wasn't just the money. Though that was part of it. It was the thought, the effort, the meaning behind the gift. It felt like he had taken something special and carelessly handed it off like it didn't matter. Jason, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm even though I could feel anger bubbling up. That was your gift. I bought it for you. Why would you just give it away? He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. I don't know, man. I figured it didn't really matter. She liked it more, so why not let her enjoy it? It's not like I wasn't grateful. But, you know how it is. She wears it more than I ever would. I didn't know how to respond. On one hand, I could see his logic. If someone else appreciated it more, why not let them have it? But on the other hand, I couldn't believe he would just pass off something that meant so much to me without even thinking about how I'd feel. It wasn't just a watch. It was a symbol of the care and thought I had put into giving him something meaningful. And now, that symbol was on someone else's wrist. It's just, I put a lot of thought into that gift. Jason, I said, trying to sound reasonable even though I was hurt. I didn't just pick it up on a whim. I got it because I thought you'd appreciate it. I do appreciate it, he insisted, though it felt hollow. It's just, Sarah really liked it, and I thought it'd be nice to let her have it. It's not a big deal. Man, not a big deal? I could feel the hurt growing stronger. Maybe to him, this wasn't a big deal. But to me, it felt like a betrayal. I had spent months thinking about this gift, planning it, saving for it, only for him to give it away like it was nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. This wasn't a fight I wanted to have. But at the same time, I couldn't let it go. Look, Jason, if you didn't want the watch, you could have just told me. I would have returned it or gotten you something else. But giving it to Sarah? It feels like you didn't even care about it. His expression shifted, and I could tell he was getting defensive. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. All right? I just didn't think it would be a big deal. You gave it to me. And I decided to let her use it. It's still in the family. That last line stung. Still in the family. As if that made it any better. The watch wasn't meant to be passed around like some secondhand item. It was a personal gift. One I had given to him. Not to Sarah. I didn't want to argue anymore. I could feel the tension rising. And I knew that pushing the issue would only make things worse. But I couldn't shake the disappointment. The sense of betrayal. It wasn't just about the watch. It was about feeling like my effort didn't matter to him. Like the meaning behind the gift was lost the moment he decided someone else would like it more. I knew then that I couldn't let this go. I couldn't sit by and pretend I was okay with it. So, I made a decision that I wasn't sure was the right one. But one that felt necessary in the moment. If you're not going to keep it, I said, my voice firm, then I want it back. I'd rather return it or keep it for myself than have it passed around like that. Jason looked at me like I'd just crossed a line. Seriously? You're going to ask for a gift back? I could feel the anger rising. But I held it back. Yeah, I am. If it doesn't mean anything to you, then I'd rather have it back. I spent a lot of time and money on that. Jason, I didn't give it to you just so you could hand it off to someone else. He shook his head, looking annoyed. Come on, man, that's not fair. Sarah likes it. Why can't you just let her have it? But I couldn't let it go. The hurt was too strong. And I couldn't pretend like it didn't matter. I had poured so much thought and effort into that gift. And seeing it given away so easily felt like a slap in the face. I had to stand up for myself. Even if it meant causing a rift. I'm serious, Jason, I said quietly. If you're not going to keep it, I want it back. And with that, the tension between us thickened. What had started as a simple question had turned into something much bigger, a battle over what gifts mean, what they represent, and how much value we place on the thought behind them. But at that moment, all I could think about was how much it hurt that something I had given with so much care had been treated so carelessly. And I wasn't sure if I could ever forget that feeling. In the days following that conversation with Jason, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. I kept thinking about how easily he brushed off my feelings. How casually he had re-gifted something I'd worked so hard to give him. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. It wasn't just about the watch anymore, it was about what it represented. The watch was supposed to be a symbol of our relationship, of the time and thought I'd put into giving him something meaningful. And he had tossed it aside like it didn't matter. I knew asking for a gift back wasn't exactly polite or normal. But this felt different. This wasn't some small, forgettable item. This was something I had saved up for. Something I'd chosen specifically for him. I had invested not just money, but a piece of myself in that gift. I couldn't just let it go like he wanted me to. I was stewing over it. My emotions going back and forth between hurt and anger. When I got a call from my mom, I should have known Jason would involve the family. The moment I saw her name on my phone screen, I knew what the conversation would be about. I took a deep breath and answered. So, I hear there's some drama about a watch. My mom said, her tone trying to sound casual but laced with concern. Yeah, I sighed, already feeling defensive. Jason gave away the watch I bought him. To Sarah, and I'm not okay with it. There was a pause on the other end, and I could practically hear her thinking about how to approach the situation. My mom's always been the mediator, trying to keep the peace between us whenever tensions rise. But this wasn't just sibling squabbling. This felt deeper. Well, honey, she began, cautiously, once you give someone a gift, it's theirs to do with as they please. You can't control how they use it. I bristled. I knew she wasn't wrong. Logically, I knew that once you give someone a gift, it's out of your hands. But this didn't feel like a normal situation. This wasn't Jason deciding not to wear the watch. He had completely given it away, without any thought about how I might feel. I get that, I said, trying to stay calm. But this wasn't just some random thing I picked up. I put a lot of thought into it. I saved for months to get him something I knew he really wanted. And then he just hands it off like it's nothing. My mom sighed, and I could tell she was trying to find a middle ground. I know you're hurt, but you can't take it so personally. Jason didn't mean to upset you. He probably just thought it was something Sarah would enjoy more. That's exactly the problem, Mom. I snapped, my frustration spilling over. It's like he didn't even care about the thought behind it. It's one thing if she wears it occasionally, but he gave it to her like it was never really his in the first place. It feels like he didn't appreciate what I did for him. I understand, she said, her voice soft but firm. But asking for the gift back is only going to make things worse. You know that, right? I sighed, leaning back in my chair and rubbing my temples. I did know that. I knew taking the gift back wasn't the socially accepted thing to do. But at the same time, I couldn't let it go. If Jason didn't want it, then fine, I'd rather have it back than let him and Sarah treat it like a hand-me-down. I just don't want him to think it's okay to dismiss something that meant a lot to me. I said after a pause, trying to explain what was going on in my head. It's not about the watch. It's about the fact that I put effort into getting him something special. And he didn't care. I get it, my mom replied gently, but sometimes people don't always see things the way we do. That doesn't mean they don't care. It just means they're not as tuned in to the meaning behind something. Jason probably didn't realize how much this would upset you. I appreciated that she was trying to help. But her words didn't erase the sting I felt. Jason might not have meant to hurt me. But the fact remained that he had. And no amount of rationalizing could change how betrayed I felt. I had given him something personal. And instead of keeping it, he'd passed it off like it was no big deal. Look, I finally said, I don't want to drag the family into this. I'll talk to him again. But I'm not backing down. If he doesn't want the watch, then I'll take it back. After hanging up, I felt a surge of determination. I knew my mom was just trying to keep the peace. But this was something I couldn't ignore. I needed to confront Jason one more time. Not just for the watch, but for the principle of it. I needed him to understand that this wasn't just about a material item. It was about respect. Respect for the thought and effort I'd put into the gift. A few days later, I went over to Jason's place, ready to lay it all out. I wasn't sure how he would react, but I knew I had to make him see my side of things. I didn't want to be confrontational, but I also couldn't let this slide. When I arrived, he seemed surprised to see me, and I could tell from the look on his face that he knew exactly why I was there. Look, Jason, I started, not bothering with small talk. I've been thinking about this, and I can't just let it go. If you don't want the watch, I'm going to take it back. I'd rather return it or keep it for myself than have it sitting with Sarah. His face darkened, and I could see the frustration building. Are you serious? You're really going to ask for it back? Yes, I said firmly. I am. I'm not okay with what you did. That gift meant a lot to me. If it didn't mean anything to you, then fine. But I'm not going to let it go without saying something. Jason shook his head, clearly irritated. Man, this is so petty. You gave it to me. It's mine to do what I want with. I could feel my own frustration rising again. But I forced myself to stay calm. It's not about being petty, Jason. It's about the fact that you didn't respect the thought and effort I put into getting you that watch. If you didn't want it, you should have said something. I would have understood. But you gave it away like it was nothing. And that hurts. He looked at me, exasperated. I didn't think it would be such a big deal. Sarah liked it, so I gave it to her. End of story. You're making this way more complicated than it needs to be. I clenched my jaw, fighting to keep my emotions in check. You're right. It shouldn't be this complicated. But here we are. You didn't care about the gift the way I thought you would. And now I'm asking for it back. That's where we're at. There was a long, uncomfortable silence between us. Jason stared at me, probably waiting for me to back down. But I didn't. I wasn't going to let this go, no matter how much tension it caused. Finally, he sighed, throwing up his hands in defeat. Fine, take the damn watch back if it means that much to you. But don't expect me to feel bad about it. I didn't think it was a big deal. And I still don't. I nodded, feeling both relief and disappointment. Relief that I had stood my ground. But disappointment that Jason still didn't seem to understand why this mattered so much to me. After I left with the watch in hand, I couldn't help but feel a lingering sadness. I had gotten what I wanted. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a reminder that sometimes, no matter how much thought and effort we put into something, it doesn't always mean as much to the other person. As I drove home, the watch sitting on the passenger seat beside me, I realized that this whole situation had changed how I viewed gift giving. It wasn't about the material things, it never had been. It was about connection, about showing people that you care. But sometimes, no matter how hard you try, that connection doesn't come through the way you hope it will. And in the end, that might be the hardest lesson of all. The drive home was quiet. The watch sat on the seat next to me. And even though I had technically won, I didn't feel like I had. In fact, the entire situation left me feeling hollow. Like something had been lost that was more valuable than the watch itself. Sure, I had it back in my possession. But the damage between me and Jason was done. He hadn't understood my side. And worse, he hadn't really tried to. As I sat at a red light, I found myself wondering if I had made the right choice. Was asking for the watch back worth it? Had I taken things too far? Maybe I should have just let it go. Like everyone had been telling me to. After all, it was just an object. But the deeper truth was, it wasn't the watch that mattered, it was what the watch symbolized. It was about the thought, the meaning, the time I'd spent putting that gift together. It was about the realization that Jason didn't see or value that effort in the way I thought he would. That hurt more than anything. Once I got home, I placed the watch on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a moment. It wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't the thoughtful, meaningful gift I had intended it to be. Now, it was just a reminder of the disappointment and the misunderstanding that had unfolded. I couldn't return it, and I didn't want to keep it. What was I supposed to do with it now? I sat down on the couch, letting out a long breath. I had always been someone who put a lot of thought into the gifts I gave. Whether it was a birthday, a holiday, or just a random surprise, I made it a point to give gifts that were meaningful and personal. It wasn't just about buying something expensive, it was about showing people that I cared. That I paid attention to the little details about them. That I wanted to make them happy. That's why I'd spent months saving up for Jason's watch. It wasn't about the price tag, but about giving him something he'd wanted for so long. But this wasn't the first time a thoughtful gesture had backfired. I started thinking about another time when I had gone out of my way to give a special gift, only to be left feeling disappointed. It was a few years ago, and I had bought my in-laws expensive tickets to a play they'd been talking about for months. I had asked them which weekend would work best. And after making sure they were available, I had surprised them with the tickets. It had cost me nearly $500, but it felt worth it because I knew how much they'd love it. Or so I thought. A few days after the date of the play, I casually asked them how they had enjoyed the show, eager to hear about their experience. But instead of the excitement I was expecting, they told me they hadn't gone. They had decided to go up to their cottage for the weekend instead, saying it was more relaxing. I had smiled through the conversation, but inside, I felt crushed. All that money, time, and energy spent, and they hadn't even bothered to go. I hadn't said anything at the time because I didn't want to create tension with my in-laws. But the disappointment lingered. It wasn't about the money, it was about feeling like my effort hadn't meant anything. And now, with Jason, I was dealing with that same feeling all over again. It was like I was stuck in a loop of giving thoughtful gifts only to have them be unappreciated, misunderstood, or ignored. It wasn't about expecting grand gestures in return, but it hurt to see the things I cared so much about get brushed aside so easily. I grabbed my phone and opened a notes app, jotting down my thoughts. Maybe it was time to start setting some boundaries when it came to gift giving. I was tired of putting in so much effort only to end up feeling disappointed. Maybe I needed to stop investing so much in other people's happiness and focus on my own. It was a hard lesson to learn, but it felt like one I needed to embrace. I typed a few words that summed up what I was feeling. Put a cap on it. I realized that from now on, I needed to stop spending so much on gifts that weren't appreciated. It wasn't about being cheap, it was about protecting myself from the hurt that came with giving so much and receiving so little in return. Maybe instead of splurging on expensive gifts, I'd stick to something simple. Maybe $50 max. Enough to show I cared, but not enough to leave me feeling bitter if it didn't go over well. If Jason wanted a $700 watch in the future, he could save up for it himself. It was a strange mix of emotions, sadness, frustration, and a little bit of relief. I wasn't going to stop giving gifts altogether, but I was going to change the way I approached it. I was done trying to be the thoughtful sibling, the one who always went above and beyond. I had to start thinking about myself too. In the days that followed, I tried to move on from the situation with Jason, but it still stung. I saw him a few times at family gatherings, and while we were polite, there was an undeniable tension between us. It wasn't something we talked about openly, but it hung in the air like a cloud that wouldn't quite go away. Still, I tried to remind myself that I had made the right decision. Taking the watch back had been about more than just reclaiming an item. It had been about standing up for myself. About refusing to let my effort and thoughtfulness be disregarded. It had been a difficult choice, but one I knew I had to make. A few weeks later, I found myself scrolling through online stores, looking for ideas for Jason's next birthday. As I clicked through different options, I realized that I didn't feel the same pressure to get him something extravagant. I wasn't going to try to impress him or outdo myself. In fact, I already knew what I was going to get him: a $25 gift card to McDonald's. It wasn't personal, it wasn't expensive, but it was enough. If he wanted something more, he could get it himself. It was a small but important shift in how I approached gift giving. No more expensive watches, no more grand gestures. I wasn't going to stop giving gifts altogether. But I was done tying my self-worth and emotional energy to how much thought or money I put into them. It was time to start setting boundaries, not just with Jason, but with myself. As I stared at the watch on my kitchen counter, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't the outcome I had hoped for, but it was a lesson learned. Gifts, as much as we want them to, don't always convey the meaning we attach to them. Sometimes, no matter how much thought we put in, the other person won't see it the way we do. And that's okay. I would keep giving, but I would no longer give so much of myself in the process. As the days turned into weeks, I slowly began to let the whole situation with Jason fade into the background. It wasn't that I'd completely forgotten about it. How could I? The watch was still sitting on my kitchen counter, a reminder of the conflict we'd had. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't holding onto the frustration as tightly anymore. Instead, I was learning to let go, piece by piece. It wasn't easy at first. I'd still catch myself thinking about how Jason hadn't even apologized, how he hadn't seemed to care that what he'd done had hurt me. Every now and then, I'd feel that sting of disappointment flare up again, but it was more like a dull ache now, rather than the sharp pain it had been in the beginning. I started focusing on other things. On my own life and what I wanted for myself. Sarah, my wife, had been incredibly supportive throughout the whole ordeal. She never pushed me to talk about it if I didn't want to. But she was there to listen when I did. And she understood why it had hurt so much, which helped me feel less alone in it all. Her calm presence helped me find my footing again, reminding me that while family dynamics can be complicated and messy, they don't have to define my emotional state forever. One weekend, I finally decided it was time to deal with the watch. It had been sitting there, untouched, for too long, and I didn't want it to continue symbolizing this negative chapter in my relationship with Jason. After some thought, I chose to return it. Not just for the money, although getting some of it back didn't hurt, but because I didn't want to keep holding onto something that felt like a burden now. Returning the watch felt like a small step toward closing this chapter for good. I walked into the store, handed it over, and watched as the sales associate processed the return. It wasn't a dramatic moment, there were no lingering emotions. In fact, I felt lighter walking out of the store. The watch had served its purpose. And now it was time to let it go, both physically and emotionally. But it wasn't just the watch I was letting go of. It was the expectation that people would always value my gifts in the same way I valued giving them. That had been the real source of my disappointment all along. I had expected Jason to feel the same excitement I had felt when I picked out that watch. And when he didn't, it hurt. But expecting people to meet us at our level of emotional investment is often a recipe for heartache. That was the lesson I had to learn. And it wasn't an easy one. Not long after I returned the watch, Jason and I crossed paths at a family gathering. It was our cousin's birthday. And the whole family was there. For the first time since the argument, I felt like I could look at Jason without all that frustration bubbling up inside me. We hadn't talked much since the confrontation, and I wasn't sure how to break the ice without making things awkward. But as the evening wore on, I realized that maybe I didn't need to force anything. Maybe time would be the best way to heal the rift between us. As the party wound down and people started to leave, Jason and I ended up next to each other by the door, grabbing our coats. There was a pause, one of those heavy silences where you both know something should be said, but neither of you knows how to say it. "Hey," I finally started, my voice softer than I intended. I returned the watch. Jason looked up, surprised. "Oh, okay, thanks, I guess." I could tell he didn't really know how to respond. But that was okay. I wasn't expecting much anymore. I wasn't looking for an apology or a big emotional reconciliation. I just wanted to clear the air a little. To let him know that I was moving on. "It's fine," I said, shrugging. "I think we both handled it, not great. But I'm over it. It's done." He nodded, still looking a little unsure. But there was a hint of relief in his expression. "Yeah, I didn't mean for it to turn into a thing. I didn't think about how it would affect you." And that was all I needed to hear. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was enough for me to feel like we could put this behind us. I gave him a small smile, nodding. "I get it. Let's just move on." We didn't say much else after that, but it felt like a weight had been lifted. The tension between us was still there, but it was starting to unravel, bit by bit. I realized then that forgiveness didn't always have to come in the form of a big emotional moment. Sometimes, it was just about letting go of the expectations and allowing things to settle naturally. After that, I began to adjust my approach to gift giving. I'd learned my lesson about putting too much emotional investment into it. It wasn't that I didn't care anymore, I did. But I understood now that not everyone would appreciate my gifts in the way I wanted them to. And that was okay. People show appreciation in different ways. And sometimes, the way I express love and thoughtfulness wouldn't align with how others do. For Jason's next birthday, I took a different approach. No more grand gestures. No more expensive gifts that required months of saving. Instead, I bought him a simple gift card to a restaurant I knew he liked. It wasn't fancy, but it was practical, and it didn't come with the same weight of expectation. I didn't need to prove anything with this gift. I just wanted him to enjoy it in his own way. When I handed him the card on his birthday, I didn't expect a big reaction. I didn't wait for that moment of surprise or excitement that I had always craved in the past. And Jason, to his credit, accepted it with a smile. It wasn't a life-changing moment for either of us, but it felt good. It felt simple, and sometimes, that's enough. Looking back on everything, I realized that the watch incident had been a turning point for me. Not just in how I approached my relationship with Jason, but in how I approached my relationships in general. It taught me to let go of the need for validation through the gifts I gave. It taught me that sometimes, people won't see or appreciate the effort you put in. And that's not a reflection of you, it's just how life is. Now, I don't let the disappointment weigh me down as much. I've learned to give freely without expecting anything in return. And I've learned to protect my own heart in the process. It's been a hard lesson, but one I'm glad I went through. In the end, it's made me stronger, more aware of my own boundaries, and more comfortable with letting go. As for Jason and me, we're okay. The watch is gone, the tension has faded, and we're moving forward. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was enough. And sometimes, enough is all you need.